Don't fire the guy who holds the patents. This is not my story. I was present for it, sure, but I did not see all of it personally. Rather, this is my father's story. So, some context. My father had a degree in mechanical engineering, either a master's or doctorate. It had taken him years to get, and he was very proud of that. Thanks to his training, he had found his way working for many well-known companies, working primarily with the procedures used to make various things. Over time, he'd privately began working on an idea that would revolutionize how school and gym lockers worked. See, my father realized that there was a problem with those type of metal lockers. Namely, it was very easy for a person to break into them. What's more, as the lockers were designed, there were multiple exposed moving parts, which meant that if a student put too many books in one, or really anything got against the door, the locker could be jammed shut, making it near on impossible to open. So, for several years, Dad toyed with a number of ideas before hitting on a new design which would solve all those problems. The inner workings of the locker's locking mechanism would be contained within the door in such a way that 1. It was impossible for someone to shim or break into. 2. The entire mechanism would be enclosed. And 3. It was relatively maintenance-free. Now, at this point, my father was the vice president of manufacturing, and apparently there wasn't a clause in his contract that said that if he designed anything while working for the company, then he had to turn that over to them for profit. Dad still approached the company, offering them the design, but they weren't interested. Dad sat on the design for a while before eventually just taking out several patents on them, and then forgetting about them. About 6 months after his first attempt at getting the company interested, the parent company's owner, chairman of the board, passed away, and the board opted to sell off some of the holdings. The company my dad worked for was part of that. The new owners were young guys who seemed to think they knew everything, as young business owners always seem to think, and they set about changing 99% of the way things were being done. At some point, they stumbled across the plans my father had designed. Now that's where things turned curious. They really wanted to start producing this new design, but as they didn't have all the plans and processes laid out for them, they had to turn to my father for answers, rather than asking him how to do it, or licensing the patents, as any reputable company would have done. They ordered him to turn over all his work, or else they would fire him. Dad stood his ground and refused. The new owners and my father went back and forth, arguing over details for several weeks, before finally the new owners fired my father for insubordination. So, onto the revenge. There may be more to this, but I'm not entirely sure if it is just pro-revenge. It could border on nuclear, based on what happened some years later. Though I'm not certain that what later happened had anything to do with my father's actions. So, after cleaning out his office and packing things in the trunk of his car, my father headed home and made a few phone calls. He must have gone through 8 or 9 different calls before he got in touch with someone who was interested in what he had to say. See, my dad was under no illusions that the company that had fired him wasn't going to just make those patented lockers on their own. He also knew that though the company itself was relatively small, the owners had money and there was no way he could fight them. However, a larger company could, so he contacted the major competitors and made them an offer. He eventually set up a meeting with some people, wheeled out on the prototype he'd made, explained how everything worked and noted that with this system the company could revolutionize the way lockers were both designed, and improve both safety and security. What's more, as he was the only patent holder for the next 7 years or so, that company could be the only company to produce them. The competitor jumped at the chance and bought all patents both for the design and the process. They even paid my dad a substantial consultancy fee to go out to their manufacturing site and teach their crews how to make the needed tool and die sets to produce them. Less than 6 months after the first company had fired him, their number one competitor was completely destroying them in the market with this new design. And there wasn't a damn thing the first company could do about it. They did try suing my father, claiming he had stolen their intellectual property. But that case quickly evaporated when they had to admit under oath that they'd never actually signed a contract with him. And there was no requirement that he turn over anything he created to the company. In the 7 years from when the second company bought the locker design and process patents, they pretty handily moved into markets that previously they'd been unable to. The first company soldiered on, but by the time the patent had finally expired, they were a shadow of their former selves. The new owners had sold the company at a loss, with the competitor buying it, only to shut that production facility down due to redundancy, put maybe 200 people out of work, though given how they'd lost so much business, I wager that it was far less than that. So yeah, the new guys don't want to play ball, threaten the guy that holds the patents on something they want to do, and then fire him, only to have him take everything to their competitor and effectively put them out of business. Edit. To answer some of the questions that have arose. 1. You don't know what his degree level was. Quote, my father and I had a difficult relationship. There are very few good memories I have of him. And it wasn't until shortly before his death in 2007 from a stroke that I really started to connect with him. I resented him for most all of my life because he was more career-minded than anything. I figure we moved some 10 times in 20 years, and it greatly affected me for a rather long period of time. I am ashamed to say, I hated my father and wanted nothing to do with him. 2. You must have ended up wealthy. Not really. Any money that Dad earned off his little endeavor was a loss after an incident that left him disabled. Medical bills being what they are. By the end of it we were pretty much broke. 3. Patents last 20 years. Design patents don't. They last 14. But the courts have historically sided with companies infringing on design patents after 7 years. So long as the infringing company develops their own method to produce whatever design is being used, and modifies or changes it. 4. What company was this? You know I can't tell you that. 5. Any variation of how did the new owners not know? Quote, that answer is pure speculation on my part. However, I got the impression that the owners were in their mid to late 20s and trying to act like investors. The company was on offer relatively cheap, from what I know, but had a rather long history in the manufacturing field. New owners LNEW everything except patent law. Your dad was right. When I was in high school, lockers were ridiculously easy to break into. There were 3 different designs in the school, and a friend of mine could open any one of them. That same guy managed to get a copy of the janitor's keys. I wonder if your dad's design would have thwarted him. Very smart move. Many people with patents get squashed like bugs, like they say in Shark Tank, by big companies that have the dollars to fight. The guy that invented intermittent wipers for cars took like 20 years to win, and it ruined his life. I wonder if he couldn't have also sued the first company for unlawful dismissal. It's not insubordination to refuse to do something you aren't obligated to do. Just like if your boss demands you give him $50, and you say no, they can't fire you for it. If there was no proviso in the contract that stipulated he had to hand the patent over, then he didn't have to. When I was in middle school, some of my gym clothes would mysteriously disappear. I know a guy whose father spent his life building a company that made parts for manufacturing companies. I'm not sure exactly what it was, but they were the only such company in a huge area. When his dad died, our guy saw a way to make much more money, much more quickly. He sold the machines that made the parts to said manufacturing companies and even sent an engineer to help them get it all set up. A year or so later, guess what? You got it. There wasn't anyone else who needed to buy his equipment. Don't feel sorry for this guy though. Yeah, that might have just been a stupid mistake, but he's one of the least likable people I've ever met. I've known him over 20 years. I honestly can't think of one good thing to say about him. This is the reason I work in a pizza place while doing my PhD level quantum computing research and not a big tech company. So, they basically did everything completely the opposite of how they should have. Because they were arrogant morons who didn't bother to make sure they knew WTF they were doing. You don't know whether your father had a doctorate or a master's. He was lucky the competitor company was interested. If they had been as short-sighted as the original company's management, he would have been up shit creek. Your dad is a legend with big balls. Thanks for sharing. A well-written and satisfying story. Thanks for posting. My dad was a naval engineer through World War II and after, and saw the terrible time burn victims have while recovering. Long story short, he invented the waterbed, and took it to his superiors, who aren't interested. He spent the better part of the 70s kicking himself for not patenting it. After his retirement from private industry, after leaving the Navy, he busied himself with reinventing the automotive steam engine. Didn't patent that one, either. This is definitely pro, but if you feel like it, you can try your chances at posting this in our Nuclear Revenge. Our Nuclear Revenge. What do engineers use for birth control? Their personalities. My father was an electrical engineer, and we also had a very estranged relationship as opted with their father. That's the equivalent of, hey, give us your invention and let us use it without giving any credit or revenue to you, or you're fired. Also, why didn't your father sue the company for wrongful termination? I have problems believing this story. Wasn't a clause in his contract that said that if he designed anything while working for the company, then he had to turn that over to them for profit. This is actually possible in the US, while in EU and Japan the invention has to be handed over to the employer that then has to compensate the inventor, before eventually just taking out several patents on them, and then forgetting about them. This is the point I somehow doubt. Application process requires a patent lawyer, and the fees accumulate to $10,000 $30,000 per patent. He did the investment, although the company rejected the idea. How did he come up with the money? How did he forget such a big investment? Silly question, but 1. What company was this? You know I can't tell you that. Why not? It seemed to have happened years ago. You're not rich from the patent, so there's no chance you'd be sued for money. Why not let us know who the bad guys are in this story?
If you enjoyed this video, please check out our playlists full of similar content. Epic Aircast is like doom scrolling for your ears. Please like, share, and subscribe.